Welcome to tonight's sleep story. Let's drift into a soothing story together as you begin your journey into a restful and rejuvenating sleep. The sun had just risen, casting a soft golden light over the quiet village. The gentle rustling of the leaves in the breeze, the soft murmur of the stream nearby, and the birds calling their morning greetings to each other filled the air with a peaceful calm. It was a day like any other in the village, but for one person, it was the beginning of something momentous. Gerhard, a young and talented craftsman, stood at the entrance of his workshop, his eyes fixed on the large piece of metal in front of him. He had spent countless hours perfecting the design of a grand bell, one that would be placed in the tower of the church at the center of the village. This bell was not just any bell, it was a creation of great significance, a symbol of hope and renewal. For Gerhard, it was the culmination of years of work, of honing his craft and dreaming of a day when his bell would ring out, filling the village with its powerful, resonant tone. He ran his fingers over the smooth surface of the metal, feeling the coolness of it under his touch. His heart beat with excitement, his thoughts filled with visions of the bell ringing for the first time, its sound echoing across the village and beyond. He had poured his heart into this project, and he believed with all his being that it would bring something extraordinary to the people, a symbol of unity, peace, and joy. As the hammer struck the metal, shaping the bell with each blow, Gerhard could almost hear the sound it would make. He could picture it now, the bell ringing in perfect harmony with the rhythm of the village, calling the people to gather, to reflect, to rejoice. It was a sound that would mark the beginning of a new chapter, not just for the bell, but for the entire village. The bell was not just a piece of metal. It was the embodiment of all Gerhard's hopes and dreams, the culmination of his efforts, and the belief that in creating something beautiful, he could make a difference in the lives of others. Each stroke of the hammer was a step closer to that moment, and with every piece of the bell that took shape, Gerhard felt the weight of his ambition and the sense of purpose that guided him. The thrum of the hammer against the metal reverberated through the workshop, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo in time with Gerhard's heart. He worked with a quiet intensity, the hours slipping by unnoticed as he focused on the task before him. The bell was taking form, its edges sharp and clean, its shape perfect. It was in his mind, more than just a tool, it was a masterpiece, a work of art, a symbol of all that he had hoped for and all that he believed the village could become. The soft, steady hum of the metal under his hammer began to shift. It was as though the bell, already filled with purpose, was becoming more alive with each strike. Gerhard's vision of the ringing bell was becoming a reality, and the weight of that realization filled him with pride and excitement. He couldn't wait to see it completed, to place it in the tower and hear its voice fill the village dot as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Casting beams of light through the open window of the workshop, Gerhard stepped back for a moment to admire his work. The bell was nearly finished, its form now solid and whole. But he knew that the true test would come when it was hung in the tower, ready to ring for the first time. He imagined the sound filling the village, echoing through the streets and across the fields. It would be a sound of unity, of hope, a sound that would bring people together. But there was still work to be done. Gerhard felt a surge of energy, his fingers itching to finish what he had started. The day was just beginning, and he knew that he had a long road ahead of him before the bell would be completed. But in that moment, standing before his creation, Gerhard felt that everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed, had led him to this point. He smiled to himself, the quiet satisfaction of a job well done filling him with a sense of peace. The bell was more than just metal and sound, it was a dream coming to life. And as the sun's rays bathed the workshop in warm light, Gerhard couldn't help but feel that this was the beginning of something truly special. Asterisk as the days turned into weeks, Gerhard's anticipation grew. The bell was finished, carefully hoisted into the bell tower, and the moment had finally come for the first ring. The villagers had gathered outside the church, eagerly waiting to hear the sound that would herald a new beginning. Gerhard stood at the base of the tower, his heart racing with excitement. He had worked tirelessly, pouring his soul into the bell, believing that its ringing would bring a sense of peace and unity to the village. The bell was lifted into place, the ropes pulling it toward the tower's peak, its great weight swinging slightly as it settled into position. Gerhard's fingers tightened around the rope, ready to pull it for the first time. The villagers, their faces filled with eager expectation, looked up at the bell. They too believed that this moment would be the start of something special, a new chapter in the life of their village. With a deep breath, Gerhard pulled the rope, but to his shock, the bell remained silent. A wave of confusion spread through the crowd. Gerhard, standing at the base of the tower, could hardly believe it. He pulled the rope again, harder this time, but still, there was no sound. The bell sat there, silent and still, as though it had no voice to give. The anticipation in the air shifted to unease, and the once eager villagers exchanged glances, murmuring in hushed tones. The craftsman's face turned pale, and his hands trembled as he continued to pull on the rope, desperate for the bell to ring. He couldn't understand what had happened. He had worked so hard, so meticulously on every detail of the bell's design. It was supposed to be perfect. It had to be perfect. The thought of the bell failing, of it remaining silent, filled him with a deep sense of dread. What had gone wrong? Why had it not rung? The villagers slowly began to disperse, their excitement turning to disappointment. Gerhard stood alone beneath the bell, his mind racing. The silence was deafening. It pressed in on him, filling the space with its unyielding weight. The sound that was supposed to bring joy, unity, and hope had not come. Instead, it was replaced by an oppressive stillness, one that seemed to swallow all the hope he had placed. In the bell, Days passed, and Gerhard tried everything he could think of to make the bell ring. He climbed to the tower to inspect the bell, checking the ropes, the mechanisms, the bell's alignment. He struck the bell with a hammer, gently up. First, then harder, but still it remained silent. It was as though the bell had lost its voice, and Gerhard couldn't fathom why in the quiet of his workshop, he sat alone, staring at the thimble that had once been a symbol of his ambition, now nothing more than a cold, lifeless object. It seemed to mock him, to remind him of his failure. The bell had not rung, and the villagers who had once looked to him with such admiration now looked away in silence. The joy and pride that Gerhard had felt when he first began the bell's creation were now replaced by a deep, aching emptiness. What had gone wrong? Had his efforts been for nothing? Gerhard wandered the village, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the quiet streets. He tried to avoid the eyes of the villagers who had once looked upon him with respect, but now seemed to have turned their backs. The bell had failed, and with it, Gerhard felt his connection to the village slipping away. He had poured so much of himself into the bell, but now it seemed like everything had been in vain. Asterisk, the days grew darker, and with each passing day, Gerhard's despair deepened. He could no longer find the joy in his work, nor could he find peace in the silence that surrounded him. The bell, which had once represented hope, now symbolized his failure. It had not rung, and he could not understand why. His heart ached. With the weight of the unanswered question, days turned into weeks, and Gerhard's efforts to make the bell ring became more desperate, more futile with each passing day. His once bright enthusiasm had faded into a shadow, and he found himself waking each morning with the same sinking feeling in his chest. The silence of the bell was now a constant companion, an unspoken reminder of his failure. The village had long since stopped gathering in anticipation of its ring, and Gerhard, now alone in his thoughts, retreated further into his own mind. The bell tower, once a place of pride, had become a prison of sorts. Gerhard would climb up each day, feeling the weight of the cold stone beneath his hands as he inspected the bell again and again, looking for any imperfection that could explain its silence, but every time he found nothing. The bell was flawless, its shape perfect, the craftsmanship immaculate. There was no reason for it to remain mute, and yet it did. The answer eluded him, like a whisper carried away on the wind. Frustration gnawed at him, pulling him deeper into his doubts. What was the point of creating something so beautiful if it could not fulfill its purpose? What was the point of dedicating his life to this work if it had no meaning? He had always believed that his work would bring joy, peace, and unity to the village, but now all he felt was emptiness, and the sound of silence pressed against his ears, louder than anything else. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the world was bathed in the soft, golden hues of twilight, Gerhard found himself sitting at the base of the bell tower. The cool evening air wrapped around him like a blanket, and the village lay still, bathed in the glow of the setting sun. He stared at the bell, wondering if it was possible for an object to lose its soul. Had the bell, in all its beauty and promise, somehow lost the ability to fulfill its purpose? Or had it never truly been capable of ringing in the first place? The wind whispered through the trees, the sound of rustling leaves the only noise that accompanied Gerhard's thoughts. He closed his eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over him. The silence was heavy, almost oppressive, but it also gave him a strange clarity. For the first time in weeks, he felt the pull of something deeper than his frustration, something more subtle, more elusive dot in that moment of quiet. He realized that perhaps he had been looking at the bell all wrong. Perhaps the silence was not a failure at all. Perhaps the bell was not meant to ring in the way he had imagined. The bell had been crafted with love, with hope, with dedication, but that did not necessarily mean it had to be loud. It did not necessarily have to be grand. The true purpose of the bell might not be in its sound, but in the act of creating it, in the heart that had gone into it. Perhaps the bell's silence was the message it carried, a quiet call to the world around it. Gerhard sat in the soft, fading light of the evening, his mind turning over these thoughts. It was a revelation, though not one that answered all his questions, but it was enough. It was a beginning. The bell's silence, he realized, was not a sign of failure. It was a space in which something new could emerge. It was a place of quiet contemplation, a place where the world could pause and reflect. The bell, silent as it was still a part of something larger, something far beyond the scope of his original expectations. With a deep, steadying breath, Gerhard stood up and walked back toward the bell. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cool metal once more. There was something calming in the touch, something that spoke of time, patience, and the rhythms of life. The bell was not simply an object. It was a part of the world around it, a part of the cycle of life, and in that cycle, silence had its place just as much as sound did. The bell had its purpose, not in its noise, but in its presence, quiet, steadfast. And waiting in the quiet of the twilight, Gerhard made a decision. He would no longer search for an answer to the bell's silence. Instead, he would listen to the world around him, listen to the space between the ringing, and listen to the deeper, unspoken truths that lay hidden in the quiet moments of life. The bell's silence was a part of the world's song, a song that needed no noise to be heard. As he turned away from the tower and made his way back to his workshop. The stars began to twinkle in the night sky, and the moon rose slowly, casting its soft glow over the village. For the first time in a long time, Gerhard felt at peace. The silence was no longer a burden, but a gift that had shown him the power of acceptance and the beauty of stillness. The journey, he realized, was never about forcing the bell to ring. It was about understanding that there was meaning to be found in the quiet moments, in the pauses, and in the spaces between dot as the days drifted by. Gerhard found himself no longer burdened by the need for the bell to ring. He had come to understand something far deeper than he ever expected, something about silence, presence, and the rhythm of the world. The once loud anticipation of the bell's sound had quieted, and in its place, there was a peaceful stillness that seemed to envelop the entire village. Gerhard continued to work in his shop, though he no longer felt the same urgency or pressure to create. His hands still shaped metal and wood, but his heart was no longer tethered to the expectation of achieving something great. He had begun to listen to the world, to the sound of the breeze moving through the trees, to the whispers of the earth itself. And in that listening, he found a deep sense of fulfillment, one that was not tied to any grand event, but to the simple act of being. The villagers, too, had adjusted to the silence of the bell. In the beginning, there had been confusion, and some had even felt disappointment, but now they seemed to accept it as part of life's natural rhythm. The church stood tall, and though the bell did not ring, the sense of community remained. People would still gather in the square, chatting, laughing, and sharing their days. The silence was no longer an absence. It had become a part of their shared experience. One evening, as Gerhard took a walk through the village, he noticed a small child standing by the tower, staring up at the bell. Her face was filled with wonder, her eyes wide as she traced the contours of the metal with her gaze. Gerhard approached her slowly, his footsteps light on the cobblestone road. The child turned to him and smiled, as if sensing his presence. "I like it when the bell is quiet," she said softly, her voice filled with an innocent wisdom. "It's like the world can rest. It's peaceful." Gerhard was taken aback by her words. He had always thought of the bell as something that needed to ring, that its purpose was to be loud and to call people together. But the child had a point. The bell did not need to ring to bring peace. The quiet was its own form of communication, soft, gentle, and grounding. The bell was not a tool for noise, but a presence that helped maintain a delicate balance between stillness and sound. As Gerhard smiled at the child, he realized that she had given him a gift. She had reminded him that peace did not come from fulfilling expectations or performing tasks. It came from embracing the present moment, from understanding that every moment, even the quiet ones, had its own value. The bell, though silent, was still a part of this larger symphony of life, and its silence had taught him more than he could have ever imagined. With a deep breath, Gerhard turned away from the tower and began walking back toward his shop. Sky above was turning shades of purple and gold as the evening settled in, and the air was crisp, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and earth. As he walked, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything: the quiet, the village, the bell, and the lessons they had all taught him in the stillness of the night. Gerhard knew that he had found something far more valuable than a ringing bell. He had found a deep, unshakable peace, not in grand gestures or achievements, but in the simple moments of everyday life. The bell might never ring in the way he had originally imagined, but it didn't matter anymore. Its true purpose had been fulfilled in a way he hadn't expected in the silence, in the acceptance, and in the realization that the world, with all its quiet beauty, was enough. The bell, still silent in the tower, had become a symbol of everything. Gerhard had learned that sometimes it is not in the loud, obvious moments that life reveals its meaning, but in the quiet, the subtle, the peaceful rhythm of existence. And with that understanding, Gerhard knew that he had completed his journey, not by achieving something great, but by embracing the simple, beautiful moments that life had to offer. Asterisk. As the days stretched on, Gerhard found himself drawn deeper into the tranquil rhythms of the village. The thimble of his heart, once filled with the clang of ambition, now vibrated softly in the quiet moments of each passing day. He no longer rushed through his work, nor did he feel the weight of expectation on his shoulders. The bell, which had once defined his craft, now simply hung there in the tower, silent but steadfast, a silent witness to the world's constant unfolding. The villagers had slowly come to accept the bell's quiet existence. Some would pause at the base of the tower, tilting their heads upward, as if they expected the bell to ring at any moment. But when it didn't, they would smile softly, as if understanding that sometimes the world had more to say in silence than in sound. The bell had become a fixture in their lives, not because it rang, but because it reminded them of something deeper, a connection to the earth, to the passing of time, and to the subtle beauty of everyday moments. One crisp morning, Gerhard was strolling through the village when he came across a small group of children playing near the church. Their laughter filled the air, and their energy seemed to infuse the very space around them with life. One child, a little girl with a loose braid and a joyful face, noticed him walking by and ran up to him. "Gerhard, come play with us," she called, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Gerhard smiled and shook his head gently. "I'm afraid I've grown too old to play as you do," he said softly, "but I'm happy to watch you." The children laughed and ran in circles, their energy contagious, but as Gerhard watched them, something caught his attention. One of the children, a boy about 12 years old, was staring up at the bell tower. His expression was pensive, almost as if he were waiting for something, and in that moment, Gerhard saw the same longing he had felt when he first crafted the bell. "Do you think the bell will ring today?" the boy asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. Gerhard turned his gaze to the bell, now bathed in the soft morning light, its surface gleaming with a faint, almost imperceptible glow. He felt a deep connection to it in that moment, a bond that transcended any sound it could make. The bell was part of the village, part of the earth, part of the universe itself. Perhaps Gerhard replied, his voice calm and steady. But sometimes we don't need to hear the bell to know that it's there. Its silence can be as powerful as its sound, for it carries a different kind of message. The boy looked up at Gerhard as if contemplating his words, then smiled and returned to his play. Gerhard continued to watch the children, the sounds of their laughter filling the air, blending with the rustling of the trees and the distant song of the birds. In that moment, he realized that the village had become more than just a place. It had become a part of him. The bell, with its silence, had become a part of the fabric of their lives, a reminder that not everything had to be loud or grand to have meaning. That evening, Gerhard sat on the porch of his small cottage, the soft evening breeze brushing against his face. The stars were beginning to emerge in the sky, and the moon was rising slowly, casting its silver light over the land. The village was quiet now, the day's bustle having faded into the peace of night. The bell, silent as always, stood in the tower, a quiet sentinel to the world below. Gerhard took a deep breath and closed his eyes. The silence around him was no longer oppressive. It was full of peace, full of acceptance. He understood now that the bell did not need to ring to be significant. Its presence was enough. The journey of its creation, the love and dedication poured into it, had not been for nothing. The bell had fulfilled its purpose simply by existing, by being a part of the village, by standing as a silent witness to the beauty of life. He smiled to himself, feeling the weight of the day lift from his shoulders. The silence was a gift, a reminder that there was no rush, no need for grand gestures or loud proclamations. Sometimes the quietest moments held the greatest significance. The bell, with all its unspoken magic, had taught him that. And for that, Gerhard was deeply grateful. As the night deepened, Gerhard stood and walked toward the church. The bell, still silent, seemed to glow under the moonlight. He reached out, placing his hand on the cold stone of the tower, and for the first time he understood. It didn't matter that the bell did not ring. It was still a part of the world, still a part of the rhythm of life. And in that, he found peace. As the days passed, the village settled into a comfortable rhythm. With the bell silently watching over them, Gerhard no longer felt the need to explain the bell's silence to anyone. It had become a quiet presence, something that was simply there, like the wind, the trees, or the stars above. It didn't need to make noise to matter, and neither did he. The villagers, once so eager for the bell's sound, had begun to understand the depth of its silence. Some still wondered why it never rang, but others had started to appreciate it in a different way. They found solace in its stillness, a calm that washed over them in the same way the moonlight bathed the village each night. It was no longer a question of expectation, but an acceptance of the bell's presence, quiet, constant, and unassuming. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting soft hues of pink and gold across the sky, Gerhard sat by his workshop, looking out at the village. The air was crisp, the breeze gentle, and the world seemed to slow down, as if the earth itself were taking a deep breath. The bell tower loomed in the distance, its silhouette peaceful against the fading light. It was a beautiful sight, one that Gerhard had seen countless times, but now it felt different. He no longer saw the tower and the bell as symbols of something unfulfilled, something missing. Instead, they had become symbols of wholeness, of the acceptance of the world as it was that Gerhard smiled softly to himself. The bell had taught him something profound, something he had not expected. It had shown him that quiet strength could be just as powerful as any loud proclamation. The bell's silence was not a failure. It was a message in itself, one that spoke of patience, acceptance, and peace. The world did not always need to be loud to be meaningful. Sometimes it was the quietest moments, the stillest sounds, that held the most significance. As the twilight deepened, Gerhard stood up from his chair and walked toward the bell tower. His steps were slow and deliberate, as if savoring each moment, each breath of the evening air. When he reached the base of the tower, he looked up at the bell, its metal surface gleaming softly in the dimming light. There was no grand announcement, no triumphant ringing. There was only the gentle hum of life around him, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant chirping of crickets, and the rhythmic pulse of his own heart. Gerhard placed his hand gently on the base of the tower, feeling the cool stone beneath his fingers. For a long moment, he simply stood there, listening to the world around him, letting the stillness seep into his bones. The bell, silent as ever, seemed to echo the quietude of his heart. He understood now that its silence was not an absence, it was a presence in itself. It was a reminder that not everything had to be loud to be important. The bell was just as significant in its silence as it would have been in its sound. A soft smile spread across Gerhard's face, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. The bell had fulfilled its purpose, not through the noise it made, but through the space it had occupied. It had taught him the value of silence, of stillness, and of the beauty in simply existing without the need to prove anything. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, Gerhard turned away from the tower and walked back toward his cottage. The night air was cool and fresh, and the stars were beginning to twinkle in the sky above. He could hear the quiet hum of the village, the soft murmurs of voices in the distance, the rustling of leaves, the occasional bark of a dog. It was a peaceful sound, one that Gerhard now understood fully. The journey of creating the bell had not been about achieving something grand. It had been about finding peace in the process, in the quiet moments, and in the acceptance of life. As it came, the bell, now still and silent, had led him to this understanding, and in that understanding, Gerhard found a quiet satisfaction. As he reached his door, Gerhard paused for a moment, looking back at the tower once more. The bell was silent, but it was not empty. It was full of meaning, full of quiet wisdom, and full of life. He smiled, knowing that the journey had been worth it, not because of the noise the bell could make, but because of the silence it had given him. He stepped inside his cottage, closing the door softly behind him. The world outside was still, the night peaceful, and in that stillness, Gerhard knew that he had found everything he had been searching for. Asterisk as Gerhard sat quietly by his hearth, the warmth from the fire flickering softly across his face. He felt a deep sense of comfort. The flames danced lazily. In the fireplace, their steady crackle, a perfect accompaniment to the peaceful silence that now enveloped his life. He had once believed that his worth, his purpose, was tied to creating something loud and remarkable, something that would echo across the village and be remembered forever. But now, sitting in the dim light of his humble home, he understood that true fulfillment did not always come in the form of grandeur or recognition. Outside, the night had settled in, casting a soft, silvery glow over the village. The moon hung low in the sky, its light spilling over the fields and rooftops, bathing everything in a quiet, reflective light. The stars twinkled softly above, distant and yet deeply comforting. The world around him seemed to breathe in time, with his own steady heartbeat, and for the first time, Gerhard felt completely at peace with his place within it. The bell, though still silent, was not a burden to him anymore. It had fulfilled its purpose, not in the way he had once expected, but in a way that was deeper, more profound. It had taught him to listen, not just to the world around him, but to the quiet places within himself. It had shown him that sometimes the most significant moments in life were not the loud, attention-grabbing ones, but the subtle, gentle ones that happened in the quiet spaces in between. As he sat there, his thoughts drifting gently, he realized that the bell had become more than just an object to him. It had become a symbol of patience, of acceptance, and of the understanding that everything in life had its time. There was no need to force the bell to ring. Its silence had its own message, and that message had reached him in ways he could not have imagined when he first began crafting it. The silence of the bell now felt like a soft, familiar companion. It was no longer something to fear or resent. It was a presence, gentle and steady, reminding Gerhard that not every part of life needed to be loud or urgent to be meaningful. In fact, it was the quiet moments that carried the deepest truths. The bell had taught him this, and now, as he sat by the fire, the quiet wisdom of that lesson settled into his heart. Outside, the wind began to pick up, rustling the leaves of the trees in the distance. The sound was soothing, like a lullaby, carried on the breeze, and Gerhard closed his eyes, letting the peacefulness of the moment wash over him. He no longer sought the bell's ring, nor did he need validation from anyone. The joy of creation, the satisfaction of knowing that he had put his heart into something, was enough. The soft ticking of a clock on the wall seemed to mark the passage of time, but for Gerhard, time no longer felt like an enemy. It was simply a companion, moving gently, allowing him to savor each moment as it came. The world outside continued its dance, the quiet hum of life pulsing beneath the surface, and Gerhard, in the calm stillness of the evening, felt fully aligned. With it all, the bell, though it never rang, had done what it was meant to do. It had brought him to this point of realization that the beauty of life was not in its noise, but in its silence. The village had learned this too. They no longer waited for the bell's sound, but instead, they embraced its presence. The bell was part of them, just as the forest, the wind, and the stars were. It was a quiet companion in their daily lives, a reminder that even in silence, there was meaning. Gerhard smiled to himself as the fire burned low. The bell was not a failure. It was a reflection of the world itself. Sometimes life gave you moments of silence to show you what truly mattered: connection, peace, and the quiet understanding that everything, in its own time, would find its place. The following days in the village unfolded with a serene, quiet rhythm, and Gerhard found himself deeply attuned to the peaceful pulse of the world around him. The bell remained silent in the tower, but it no longer seemed like a symbol of emptiness or failure. Instead, it had become a part of the village's heartbeat, a silent sentinel that stood watch over the passing days. The villagers, once uncertain and restless, had begun to find comfort in the quiet presence of the bell, understanding that it was as much a part of their lives as the trees, the seasons, and the sky above. Gerhard continued his work, but now, with a sense of calm that he had never known before. His days were no longer filled with frantic striving, with the pressure to achieve something grand or remarkable. Instead, he focused on the simple beauty of his craft, the sensation of shaping metal, the soft glow of the furnace, the rhythmic motion of his hands. The act of creation had taken on a new meaning for him. It was not about creating something to be celebrated or admired. It was about creation for creation's sake, about the joy that came from making something with love and care. Without the need for external validation, he often wandered through the village, taking in the simple sights and sounds that had always been there, but that he had once overlooked in his pursuit of greatness. The soft rustling of the leaves in the wind, the laughter of children playing in the square, the distant hum of voices, these were the moments that Gerhard now cherished. The world no longer felt like something to be conquered or understood. It was something to be experienced, appreciated, and embraced. One crisp autumn afternoon, Gerhard took a walk through the fields beyond the village, his footsteps crunching softly on the fallen leaves. The air was cool and fresh, and the golden light of the setting sun bathed the landscape in a soft glow. The trees, their leaves turning shades of red and gold, stood tall and proud, their branches reaching toward the sky in silent tribute to the changing season. Gerhard paused for a moment, letting the peacefulness of the scene wash over him. He closed his eyes, breathing in the crisp, earthy scent of the autumn air. For the first time in a long while, he felt completely present, completely at peace with the world. As he stood there, looking out over the fields, Gerhard thought how far he had come. The bell, which had once represented his ambition and expectation, had now become a quiet part of the village's life. It had fulfilled its purpose, not through sound, but through its silent presence. The bell had reminded him that not all things in life were meant to be grand and loud. Sometimes the most powerful things were the quietest. And in that silence, there was a beauty that words could not capture. Gerhard smiled softly to himself as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon. The world was settling into the quiet of evening, the air cooling, the stars beginning to twinkle in the sky above. He could hear the soft murmur of the village in the distance, the occasional bark of a dog, the gentle rustling of the wind through the trees. It was a peaceful sound, one that filled him with a deep sense of gratitude. He no longer felt the need to chase after anything. He had found what he had been looking for all along, the quiet, simple moments of life that were full of meaning, even when they were not noticed. The bell in the tower, still silent, seemed to echo the quiet peace that had settled in his heart. It was no longer a symbol of failure, but a symbol of acceptance, accepting the natural rhythm of life, the ebb and flow of time, and the beauty of the moments in between. Gerhard had learned that there was value in the quiet, that it was just as important as the noise and excitement that often defined human existence. And in that quiet, he had found a deep sense of fulfillment that could not be measured by the loudness of a bell or the recognition of others. As the night deepened and the world around him grew still, Gerhard made his way back to the village. The stars overhead seemed to shine brighter than ever before, their light reflecting in the calm waters of the nearby stream. The village was at peace, and he was at peace. And the bell, silent though it was, had played its part in bringing that peace. It had taught him that there was no need for loud proclamations to signify meaning. Sometimes the most profound things were the quietest, the simplest, and the most enduring. Gerhard smiled, feeling the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. He was no longer searching for answers, no longer trying to prove anything. He was simply living, simply being. And in that being, he had found everything he had ever needed.